Russia has attacked Poland. NATO is scrambling fighter jets, but the main question is, will they strike the Kremlin? Meanwhile, the US is finally washing its hands of the situation and withdrawing from the Russia-Ukraine war. China is taking over the world and absorbing America. Or who is Donald Trump really working for? We'll talk about all this right now on the show Razborka. I'm Alexander Prepodobny. Please welcome our guest. Friends, please welcome Yuri Rashkin to the show Razborka, a public figure and host of the YouTube channel Rashkin Report. Yuri, hello, we're glad to see you.
Greetings, Alexander. Thank you for the invitation. Glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes. Well, let's start, I think, with the most important thing. Now it's absolutely blatant. Some sources are reporting that 20 drones, though earlier this morning we heard it was no more than 10, headed toward Polish territory. They passed completely unimpeded through the skies of the European Union and, most importantly, a NATO member country. So Donald Tusk said that all targets were engaged using Dutch F-35s, Italian AWACS, as well as NATO's multipurpose transport refueling aircraft and German Patriots. Mark Rutte, the head of NATO, said that the alliance successfully repelled Russia's attack on Poland. So what happens next? Could you please tell us? Will any conclusions be drawn from this? Or is it just good that they didn't make it to Warsaw? Even if the two largest airports in the country had to be shut down. But the main thing is nothing actually landed anywhere. Phew, we can relax now. But what will actually happen?
Judging by the reaction I've seen so far, NATO, as they've always said, is a defensive alliance. It's an alliance that isn't going to attack Russia under any circumstances. But the main quality of NATO, in my view, was when there was a security guarantee from the United States. For example, when President Biden said that we will not allow, we will defend every inch of NATO territory. And generally speaking, we've never really heard that from this 47th president. And moreover, all we hear from him are signals like, you pay more and we'll think about it. And actually, we want to have good relations with Russia. So what I'm observing here, in fact, seems to me a very alarming situation, because the chances that the Poles will now march on Moscow, well, I think, are about zero. If the United States were under real leadership, then we could talk about something. Then it would be possible to seriously discuss whether this is sufficient for, say, if Poland demands to invoke the article, like, we need to gather, and so on, or not to invoke it. That would be the question. But now we simply see that each of the countries, which, as Trump said, is a European problem, and therefore European countries should deal with it. But the situation, it seems to me, is even more alarming than just that, because this is a clear signal, and a signal that it seems to me is not so much being sent as one that will be heard in Europe, that any one of us could be next and America is not coming to save anyone. That's why we urgently need to wind down all aid to Ukraine and only look out for our own backsides, because they could come for you next, and here you are handing out goods, things you might need yourself. You're giving them away, giving them to Ukraine, and now we no longer have a year. We might have weeks, months, hours, days. It's unclear. And after this, Putin doesn't have to do anything else for quite a while. And it seems to me that the reaction will still be very strong, because we see that NATO is not ready to start a war with Russia over such a conflict, over such, well, a violation of airspace, practically an attack on a country. But it turns out you can just turn a blind eye to it, so to speak. We're exposing ourselves. It's not just Trump who's the naked king. Now all of NATO has turned out to be half-dressed. Nevertheless, European countries, European fighter jets took part. And although, as far as I understand, they carried out this attack less successfully than the Ukrainians do, who fend off drones every night, nevertheless, the undeniable fact that these were indeed different sovereign countries that actively participated in this significant endeavor gives me considerable hope that there are genuinely serious and resolute intentions to effectively confront Russia. On the other hand, what still profoundly worries me and causes significant concern is that we currently have this rather extensive coalition of countries, specifically 26 distinct nations, but regrettably, I haven't heard anyone publicly publish all the specific names of these participating countries. And just having 26 willing participants is not the same as having Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Ukraine, well, Ukraine itself, of course, and so on down the list. Please, list the names. And this is not about Putin now trying to put pressure on Europe and with the help of Trump, who is gently stepping aside to show Europe that it urgently needs to abandon Ukraine. This also leads us to the conclusion that Yuri Felshtinsky spoke about, and he is not the only one now, that this looks like an impending war against Europe, which Russia is preparing and which Trump, in principle, does not oppose. Because another way to make America great is to weaken everyone else, starting with Europe. And Europe, it seems to me, was hoping and expecting that the United States would fulfill its guarantees. But on November 5th of last year, it was like the bottom fell out, and now here in the United States, we're trying to figure out what that means, how badly the bottom fell out, who is prepared for this, who is not prepared at all, and so on. Europe is also trying to figure out what is happening now. But it seems to me that Putin has finally received a signal from Trump that Trump will give him 2 weeks, as much time as he needs. And the question is, what will Putin do about this, and what will Europe do about this? But it is becoming quite obvious what America will do about this. Nothing.
Regarding the war with Europe. Here are some interesting images that journalists working with open sources have analyzed, and they have concluded that the Belarusian authorities have, in recent years, modernized a number of airfields that were involved in the attack on Ukraine from Belarus. So what is this about? To be specific, changes were noticed at the Luninets airfield, as it's called, which is located more than 50 kilometers from the border with Ukraine. In 2022, it became the base for more than 24 Russian Su-25 fighter jets, Su-34 bombers, and helicopters that attacked Ukraine in the first days of the large-scale war. As can be seen from these images, barracks were restored at the airfield, old hangars were modernized, and even new ones were built. Fuel depots, fortifications, numerous air defense systems, and missile complexes were constructed. So that's the story. Let's continue with this topic because it's really important to understand if Russia truly intends to keep fighting with Europe, who will be its allies? What do you think? Will China now step in militarily, shoulder to shoulder in this situation? And most importantly, what kind of timeline are we talking about? What are your current predictions for the immediate future?
What we are witnessing now, the grand parades we've observed, all this elaborate celebration of the perceived unity of various dictators, doesn't necessarily mean that they will actively help each other in any substantial way, but rather that they simply don't intend to stand in each other's immediate path or create obstacles. And that particular point is profoundly important because now, as a direct consequence, Russia can feel sufficiently emboldened and confident enough to move forward with its own agenda. What moving forward means, we will find out, literally hour by hour. It could mean Poland or Moldova. It might simply be pressure on those countries so that they now refuse or ask everyone else to stop helping Ukraine, because according to Putin, they need to focus on their own defense and let Ukraine take care of its own defense. But in this particular situation, we absolutely have to carefully observe how events and circumstances develop. If people genuinely act like the resilient Ukrainians, it profoundly means that Vladimir Putin could potentially get significantly bogged down in several protracted and difficult wars all at once, none of which are truly progressing or going anywhere effectively, and he consequently gets completely stuck, and his military forces, he loses even more of his already diminished strength, because instead of just losing the pitiful and insignificant remnants of his vast empire in Ukraine, he could very well lose them in Poland, and quite possibly in Finland or some other strategic location as well. The question is, if there comes a moment, a tipping point, when, as Roma Tsimbalyuk said, a war party emerges, not people who advocate for making deals with Russia, but people who say that Russia must be confronted, Russia must be stopped, and Russia must be pushed back. So far, we are still hearing many more conciliatory statements emanating from various European countries, which, well, if they find themselves completely without the steadfast support of the United States, they too ultimately end up, in a very real sense, as emperors with absolutely no clothes at all. Because Uncle Sam, armed, is standing aside, smoking, and waiting for Putin to deal with everyone. That's not a pleasant scenario. How long could this take? I hope that Ukraine, at the very least, is showing everyone an example that if you stand up to Russia, it is possible to do so successfully for years, and that Russia can indeed be stopped. But on the other hand, the reaction of the Poles now seems very telling to me, because they don't want to fight, they don't want to get involved in a war with Russia right now, and they absolutely don't want to intercept missiles that might be headed their way. And they have absolutely no appetite to send missiles that would be headed for Moscow. Right now, at this particular political moment in the world, I don't sense any such appetite. But on the other hand, politicians and people change. Zelensky was supposed to be the person who would make peace with Russia, someone who would suit Putin, and the Ukrainians made their choice. But then Zelensky acted in such a way that now it turns out Putin, he thought he had gotten his man, but he didn't get his man. The situation changes, and when troops cross the borders of countries, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a repeat of everything that happened, say, during World War II. Experience teaches people and countries are better prepared, but I feel that the waiting period we had to prepare for what is coming is, in some sense, coming to an end.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
And there's something else I'd like to ask you, Yuri. You say that the United States of America might step back from these affairs in order to become great again. But nevertheless, if we understand that Russia is a direct tool of China for expanding its influence in Europe, right now, it's trying to use this tool to expand its influence in Ukraine, albeit unsuccessfully. So how could the American establishment possibly agree to this at all? And in general, could you please explain how they currently view the possibility of America's self-isolation as of now? Hasn't the situation become more obvious over these past 8 months? And are the consequences, which will clearly be catastrophic, including for the United States and its economy, also not clear to them? Please tell us.
Look, there are two significant points I'd really like to discuss in detail with our esteemed viewers based on what you've just said. First, regarding China and the persistent idea of potentially pulling China away from Russia, all these intricate geopolitical concepts. The stronger China appears to become on the global stage, the less interested Donald Trump is in actively fighting against its growing influence. Well, if you don't want to, then fine, we won't do it. So what will we do then, We'll change our Pentagon strategy and now we'll deploy our troops into American cities. We'll forget about China, we'll forget about Russia, and we'll basically be fighting among ourselves. And that's how we'll solve our main problems. This is, in principle, the Pentagon's new strategy. So to say that we've suddenly forgotten about China and Russia and are just dealing with, at most, drug cartels, it turns out America isn't capable of anything more. Basically, that's how we are. We're just hiding out. In other words, it's like Trump is projecting his own weakness onto all of America. On the other hand, when it comes to the establishment, if the establishment in the United States is democratic, then it shouts but carries no weight because it's not in power and moreover it's under attack. The democratic establishment, the universities, basically anywhere they can now find democratic institutions that are engaged in anything that helps other people. This is for now just a manifestation of, I don't know, some kind of anti-Trump sentiment. So yes, the Democratic establishment understands everything, but they can't do anything about it. And the Republican establishment sits in fear because if they say a word against the president, their political career is over. We can see this now with the example of Epstein, the Epstein case, where everyone understands everything, but the Republicans keep completely silent, and the Republican channels are silent too because the president told them yes. And that's why late-night comedians joke about how the emperor has no clothes and how no one can say anything about it. And all the Republicans have to say how wonderfully he is dressed and how he has been given beautiful new suits. The only thing that's unclear is why he pinned that little scrawny thing, that squirrel, between his legs. But those are just details. So the establishment in America doesn't matter at all right now. The only things that matter in a sense are the courts and Trump. But to file a lawsuit over the fact that Trump has damaged the prestige of the United States, well, who is going to file that? In principle, the American people are supposed to do that at the elections. Isn't that how it works for us? And all those congressmen who claim that now is the time to bring NATO in and so on, well, go ahead and shout for heaven's sake, as if you actually have any say in the matter, as if anything depends on you. Trump snaps his fingers and they'll elect another Republican in your place who will be more in agreement with Trump. That's the kind of story this is, you see. That's why China is looking stronger and stronger here. We're basically just saying, no, this isn't happening. And our elites, who should understand, both on the right and the left, just how dangerous all this is for the United States, both domestically and abroad. And right now, the elites are in this kind of sad state. And when it comes to the business elites, well, they should realize that this will all end badly for them, that things are already getting worse and will only get worse. But they're also keeping quiet because they're afraid that Trump might put pressure on them or harm them in some way. The American authorities, when we think about them, we tend to assume they're responsible people. But if an irresponsible person comes to power in the US, they actually have a lot of levers of authority and means of pressure on universities, on other politicians, on businesses.
Yuri, I want to ask you about J.D. Vance's statement, in which he says that Russia is demanding Ukraine give up about 6,000 square kilometers of its territory to stop the war. In his opinion, and I quote, Trump wants to put pressure on both Russia and Ukraine to stop the war. Please tell me, this agenda of ending the war in exchange for territory, how much does the Trump administration actually believe in it?
I don't think they believe in anything. I think that for their strategy, it's enough that they often talk about wanting peace. Because for someone who doesn't follow anything, that's enough. People say, but at least he's trying. Well, Russia, Ukraine, he's not Ukraine, he's not the president of Russia. So, well, he just didn't try hard enough. He couldn't do it, but he's trying, always talking about peace, our great peacemaker. Maybe he'll succeed, maybe he won't, who knows? And his base, they won't turn away from him because of this. And J.D. Vance, who spreads disinformation, he deliberately sends out messages, contradictory ones, when the president disappears, and then blames everyone, saying, see, you thought the president was gone, haha. And who, damn it, gave the interview saying, I'm ready to take on my duties whenever needed. So, J.D. Vance, he's a pretty smart guy, highly educated. He adapts to those in power, and he does what he thinks will please Donald Trump. And right now, he's clearly on very good terms with Trump. Just yesterday, a remarkable video came out showing Trump, J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, and Pete Exedem going out to lunch at a restaurant in Washington, which, by the way, shows that they're all, well, on pretty good terms. And at Trump, and at a family sitting in the restaurant just started yelling at him, saying that he is today's Hitler. And basically, it was all caught on camera, just classic protest stuff. So this is precisely what is happening right now with a president such as this, a truly unique leader who undeniably has a vice president that so clearly and unequivocally expresses the president's very own deeply held views. He would absolutely not say anything at all unless, God forbid, the president, Donald Trump, didn't genuinely like it or somehow didn't completely approve of it. And here, everything is very clear for Trump, and, well, so to speak, all these statements about what we agree or disagree on are meaningless, because right now we see that Putin continues to show no interest in negotiations, no interest in any peace process at all. How can you even discuss a peace process when he's already moving on Poland? So here, J.D. Vance's statement is simply disinformation and misinformation. Well, besides that, he also said on the air of his favorite, as I understand it, no, it's not Fox News. I think it's some other TV channel. He says that President Trump does not consider it necessary to economically isolate the Russian Federation. And in the significant event that a comprehensive resolution to the ongoing war in Ukraine is successfully reached, I'm translating here, please excuse me, then he is absolutely ready for a full and extensive range of economic agreements with the Russian government. You often say that in the United States, public opinion widely perceives Vladimir Putin and the entire nation of Russia as inherently evil. So how can J.D. Vance talk about this if Americans don't like it? So does this mean that Americans already, to some extent, support or have been conditioned to support such a position? Please tell us, how is this perceived by the average person? Things like this. You see, the average person doesn't bother J.D. Vance because the average person won't kick J.D. Vance out or cause him a lot of trouble. But Donald Trump, well, Donald Trump can't fire the vice president, but he can cause him a lot of problems and turn him into a completely meaningless figure who gets dragged through the mud. Instead, they throw it at people like mud. So it's a completely different situation, so to speak. There are nuances. And for J.D. Vance, it's much more important that, well, that Trump is pleased with him. And Trump likes Putin a lot. And from Trump's point of view, when we talk, I think, about Russia and all sorts of business projects and everything he can get out of it, yes, of course, you can make anything out of it, build Trump towers wherever you want. But in the end, Russia is a resource-based country. So making some kind of projects out of it, when you pull up to a gas station and you press something, let's say something pours out of your pipe, your hose, where did it come from? Who the hell cares? It just keeps flowing and flowing, expensive, cheap. That's what concerns me. And that's why a resource-based economy like Saudi Arabia or Russia shouldn't have to observe any human rights in such a world. Because if people buy irresponsibly, the customer is always right, and the customer doesn't care. So, in this sense, lifting sanctions from Russia, yeah, we probably wouldn't even really notice it. Well, maybe some companies like Starbucks or McDonald's won't want to go to Russia. Or maybe the president will tell them, if you want to do business with me, then you will go to Russia. And they'll go without hesitation because the American market is more important to them than any losses in the Russian market. So it's quite easy to imagine here that Trump sees very clear opportunities for how to open up Russia, and basically without worrying about human rights or whether it's good or bad. On the other hand, what kind of human rights and protection of human rights can we expect from America when their Supreme Court has just given the president permission for his immigration service to detain people basically based on their skin color? If they look ethnically similar to Latin Americans, now they can be detained. What kind of human rights is that? What are we even talking about here? About nothing? That's why for Trump, it's not a problem to lift sanctions from Russia, especially if there's an agreement from this Ukraine that keeps trying to run away somewhere. But if Ukraine finally signs and says, we're satisfied, everything's fine, and Zelensky's head is served on a platter, well, that's just peace, hooray, and we celebrate. But from the perspective of ordinary Americans, again, if you've always been against Donald Trump, then you're unquestionably for Ukraine. At most, you might think that we're helping Ukraine too much instead of focusing more on the terrible Israel, but that's just a detail of the left wing. Still, people there have a negative attitude toward Putin. But from the right wing, those 90% of Republicans who support Trump, no matter what, well, for them, it would be interesting, but Trump is more important to them. Putin is somewhere far away. The Taliban is somewhere far away. China is somewhere far away. But our great Trump, he's right here, hovering above us. When he's off the air for a few minutes, we start to wonder if something happened to him, God forbid. But then he sends us tweets and we see again that he's with us. Well, hooray, the great leader. So in such great greatness, priorities shift a bit and other things become more important.
In conclusion, I want to mention what CNBC and BBC are reporting, that at a meeting with European leaders, Trump demanded that they impose 100% tariffs on goods from India and China in order to demonstrate their loyalty and commitment to his policies. And let me remind you that the main buyers of oil from Russia are India and China. After that, they sell petroleum products to the countries of the European Union. Obviously, this is an incredible blow to the economy of the European Union. Perhaps there won't be any development of the military-industrial complex at all. And in fact, as he wanted, yes, for European countries to allocate up to 5% of their GDP to NATO, they simply won't be able to do it. And what do you think? Will Trump try to put even more pressure specifically on the European Union? And most importantly, will he succeed in doing so? So who do you think will win this blame game?
You know, I'm often asked by many thoughtful individuals who would truly be better as president of this great nation, J.D. Vance or Donald Trump. And after much careful consideration, I tend to think that J.D. Vance would probably be the better choice, because despite absolutely everything I've previously said and will continue to say about him, at least he's not completely and utterly in love with Vladimir Putin, which is a significant and crucial distinction in today's complex geopolitical landscape. Because the way Trump is behaving right now just looks like some kind of chemical addiction, because he's so utterly incapable of either effectively imposing tariffs or truly harming Putin in any significant way, that he has to impose these tariffs on those who continue to buy from Russia, just to, well, send a clear hint to Russia. Or he sells weapons not directly to Ukraine, but through Denmark. It's a kind of panic. I don't know if it's fear or love that Trump feels toward Putin, a sort of reverence, so much so that he apparently can't even comprehend how one might punish Putin. He only sees a way to resolve the war, to stop the war, either through Ukraine's capitulation or by punishing everyone who does business with Russia. And the most interesting and sad thing is that he is fighting with allies. He is fighting with democratic countries. This is a trade war that is happening right now. Well, essentially, it's practically a global trade war that Trump started with allies who need our military protection. What we started with is, well, these are not countries that would want to go to war with us. In fact, they like us, America. They would really like to be friends with us, but we are not behaving that way. We are now punishing them for this friendship. And the only ones we are not punishing for all these good things, for everything that's happening, is Russia. So to imagine that Trump would at some point say no, that would mean his entire policy, his whole worldview would have to be reconsidered, because right now he holds everyone responsible except Russia. And if that happens, he might only be dissatisfied with what's going on. That he's dissatisfied, he doesn't even explain why. He can't say it's because Putin is bombing Ukraine. No, that's exactly what's happening. It's some kind of strange pathology that we've gotten ourselves into and are now trying to figure out. So to imagine that Trump could fall out with Europe, well, he's trying. That he will do everything he can to save Russia, well, he's trying. The question that comes to my mind is if, as the president of Portugal said, Donald Trump is somehow, so to speak, directly dependent on Russian or Soviet intelligence, and let's say is their agent, then if the United States is being run by, if the Americans elected someone who, well, works with Russia, then are we an independent country or are we, in a way, part of the Russian Empire? Because right now we are behaving like part of Russia, like a vassal of Russia. We are destroying our healthcare, our science, our education, our defense. Renaming the Ministry of Defense to the Ministry of War is madness, which ultimately weakens our defense capability, at the very least, because everyone understands that when the next Democratic president comes, all of this will be reversed. So this is chaos that, well, probably should be happening in a conquered colony, which has just been subdued. It's just very interesting to watch this from the inside because for us, the sun rises, the sun sets, everything goes on as usual. It's just that something strange is happening with the economy, and the national interests are also somehow odd. Well, the president will figure it out. Well, let's hope so.
In conclusion, I'll say this. Trump's latest quote before another conversation with Putin, which is apparently supposed to take place, went like this. It seems that every time I think Putin and I are getting close, he goes and drops another bomb on someone. And that's just unacceptable. It's very bad. I'm very surprised. Honestly, I'm very surprised. I thought this would be the easiest case, Russia and Ukraine. I said this issue would be quick, but it's complicated. You know, as they say, quotes from great people. Yes, let's hope that this chemistry will break off one way or another for whatever reason, because frankly, we don't have any other options. Thank you. Yuri Rashkin, host of the YouTube channel Rashkin Report, public figure and representative of Rock County, Wisconsin. Thank you. Goodbye.